those at home with you. We're looking at a bunch of different shapes, and these shapes are labeled from A to L. And I want you to notice that all of these shapes are formed with straight lines. There's no curvy lines at all in them. And they are all closed figures, which means all the lines meet at some point. And because they're made with those straight lines and they are those closed figures, those are called polygons. So you learned that way back probably in 3rd grade, but it does us good to kind of review a little bit when we're starting here. Because in 5th grade, we just kind of throw all these concepts in together and assume that you remember them. So we want to make sure that we're reviewing those things. The next thing I want you to notice is that every one of these shapes, A all the way through L, they each have 4 sides to them. So because they have 4 sides, they're called quadrilaterals. And you can remember that anytime you hear the prefix quad or the root quad, it means 4. So even when we're talking about our quads in our legs, our muscles, that's 4 actual muscles. So learning those roots to things really helps us to understand what we're doing there as well. So all of these are polygons. All of these are quadrilaterals because they have the 4 sides. Now today in lesson 16, we are moving on to figure out what makes something a trapezoid. And tomorrow in lesson 17, which I'm also going to talk about today, we're learning what makes something a parallelogram. So let's talk about both of those things now. A trapezoid has to have at least one set of parallel lines. Now, if you can follow my cursor on these shapes, look at B. And we're going to see that it has a parallel side here and a parallel side here. And that term parallel means kind of like railroad tracks, that those 2 sides will never cross. If we drew them out forever and ever and ever, they will never ever cross. So we're seeing that like here on the sides of B, it has a set of parallel sides. And the same is true with the top and the bottom. It has a set of parallel sides. So this shape B has 2 sets of parallel sides. If we look at a shape like, let me see if I can find another one. How about on L? This is a true trapezoid that we would normally think of when we think of the word trapezoid because it only has 1 set of parallel sides, the top and the bottom. If we drew those out, they would go on forever and ever and ever and never cross. But these other sides that we see on the 2 sides here, they would cross. If we continue to draw out L, it would go ahead and cross down at the bottom. So a trapezoid is any shape that has at least 1 set of parallel sides. Now it can have more, such as in B or even in C. These 2 sides are going to go on forever, and they will never ever cross. So that's actually what makes a shape a parallelogram. It has to have 2 sets of parallel sides. So that would be true in B. That would also be true in C, as well as in D. Those are just 3 quick examples to show you. So a trapezoid, 1 set of parallel sides at least, and a parallelogram, at least 2 sets of parallel sides. Now, when we are looking at classifying shapes, this is where it gets a little tricky. All of these shapes are polygons, but all of these shapes are also quadrilaterals. Now, the ones that have at least 1 set of parallel sides are also trapezoids. So some of these are trapezoids, but they can have the 4 names. They can be polygons, they can be quadrilaterals, they can be trapezoids, and they can be parallelograms. So it's kind of like saying, if we got like a big example, you are all students. You are all kids. Now let's make it smaller, right? Not all students are kids. Some students are adults who are in college. So when we make it smaller, you guys are students, but you are also kids. Now let's make it even smaller. You guys are all, not all of you, some of you are 10 years old. Now let's make it even smaller. Some of you are students who are kids, who are 10 years old, who are also boys. So that's kind of what we're doing here. You're all students. You're all the big idea. So all of these are polygons, the big idea. But then we narrow it down a little bit more by giving them a little bit more of those characteristics. All right, let me switch to a different screen here so we can head straight into problem set 16. So if you have your problem set 16, go ahead and pull that one up and let's look at it together. Your required problems are number 1, so all of number 1. And on here, we're actually going to be drawing some of those trapezoids. So let's read the directions. It says, draw a pair of parallel lines in each box. Then use the parallel lines to draw a trapezoid with the following. So this one says with no right angles. So if you have your paper in front of you and you're writing, that's fine. I was trying to do everything digitally for you today. So I wanted to go ahead and show you how to do that. I downloaded this document and I was dragging it into a Word document. And I'm going to put insert here. And then I'm going to go to shapes and I'm going to select a straight line. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a trapezoid, remembering that a trapezoid has to be made of those straight lines. It has to be a closed figure to make it a polygon. It also has to have 4 sides to make it a quadrilateral. And then we just learned that a trapezoid has to have at least 1 set of parallel sides. So that's why it says here in our directions to use the parallel lines to draw a pair of parallel lines and then use them to draw it with these characteristics. So I'm going to go ahead and put a line in here. Make sure your microphones are muted for me, guys, so nobody hears you. So we're going to go ahead and put a line right here. I'm going to draw another line down here to make, I clicked the wrong one, to make a parallel line. Oops. Uh-oh. Let me erase all that. Uh-oh. I do not know what I did. So let me see if I can go back and erase it. Uh-oh. I'm having all kinds of trouble. I'm going back to where I was before. All right, we're just going to use my colored lines here and insert some lines. So let me insert my shape. Here we go. So I'm going to put in another parallel line. You could see how these lines, if they went on forever and ever, they would never cross. Now I know a right angle makes the letter L. So I want to go ahead and take that off, and I'm going to insert another line. I don't want any sort of L's, any right angles. Those would be 90 degrees. So I'm just going to connect these 2 lines right here, and I'll do it again. And through that, I'm going to be able to see I have now created, I'm not sure if somebody else is coloring on my screen. If you are, please don't do that because it's distracting. But you can see that I just drew on here a parallel, there are 2 parallel sides right here and right here to create a trapezoid that has no right angles. So you're going to see that there are no L-shaped angles here, exactly 90 degrees. Moving on to this one over here. I'm going to go ahead again and insert 2 parallel lines. Let me insert another one. And this one, I want to make sure that my angles are larger than 90 degrees. Oh, look, I think I have that here, don't I? Because you're going to remember, yes, a right angle is 90 degrees, but an obtuse angle is greater than 90 degrees. So I can go ahead and make this come out really far over here. and it says only one obtuse angle. So let me go ahead and do that again. I could make these with straight lines. I could put a right angle in this one. Remember, because it's a trapezoid, I'm only going to have four sides. So let me just connect these two. If you are drawing on my screen, please stop doing that. Thank you. And there I have drawn one with an obtuse angle, which would be right here, which would be greater than 90 degrees. Now, two obtuse angles, again, you're looking for two angles that are greater than 90 degrees. And down here, I'm looking for one right angle right here that is, it can have any of these other characteristics and attributes, but it needs to only have one angle that is a right angle. I'm sorry, it says at least, so we could have more than one if we need it. Alrighty, let's look at my next lesson, which is lesson 17, and then I'll give you guys time. If you're drawing on the screen, can you please stop drawing on my screen? It makes it really hard for me to help you guys. All right, so on lesson 17, we're now moving on to parallelograms. So remember, we're talking from that big idea of all polygons made with straight lines and closed figures. They need to be quadrilateral, so they're all going to have four sides. They are still going to be considered trapezoids because they have at least one set of parallel sides. But in order for it to be considered a parallelogram, it now has to have two sets of parallel sides. So number one is not required, but I'm going to go ahead and draw it for you because I want you to be able to see what I am talking about here. So a parallelogram with no right angles. My son in third grade just did this on his math lesson this morning. So we're doing the exact same thing that they're doing in third grade. We're just making it a little bit harder in fifth grade. We're going to look for two sets of parallel sides. So I've already drawn one set of parallel sides. I'm going to just connect the dots, knowing that I'm not perfect at this, and you probably aren't either, and that's fine. We're going to hope these sides are pretty close to being perfect. And we'll see that these two sets of sides, these two sides are parallel, and so are those. And I have no perfect right angles, no 90-degree angles. Excuse me. If I were going to draw these with at least two right angles, let's go ahead and do that one. We know that a right angle is going to come down like this. Oops, let's see. And we'll insert another one. Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. Let's make a right angle over here. Okay, there's our 90-degree angle right here. We know that we have to have the sides being parallel. So let's form those. And let's put in our final line to connect the dots basically to see that we have two sets of parallel sides, which makes it a parallelogram, and we have at least two right angles. So there you go. So looking at those two, we can see again that what makes it a parallelogram are those two sets of parallel sides. Now I'm going to scroll down to number 4. I just copied and pasted some words in here because this is your required problem for lesson 17. And it says list all the properties that are shared by all of the parallelograms that you worked with today. And you should include things like it has two sets of parallel sides to make it a parallelogram. If we work backwards and it was a trapezoid, it has to have at least one set of parallel sides. We know also that it has to have 4 sides, and it has to be a closed figure. That's what makes, that's what makes a parallelogram a parallelogram. Now, if we're moving down to A, it's going to say, when can a quadrilateral also be called a parallelogram? Well, this is what makes it a quadrilateral, are these four sides, and it has to be a closed figure. So what makes it a parallelogram is it has to have those two sets of parallel sides. And then lastly, when can a trapezoid also be called a parallelogram? And I would include that a trapezoid has at least one set of parallel sides when it has two sides or two sets of parallel sides, it is called a parallelogram. There you go. And there you have it. So just summing it up once again, in case you didn't get it, all polygons are made of straight lines that form a closed figure. So a polygon, again, could have 3 sides, it could have 6 sides, it could have multiple sides. It doesn't matter how many it has, as long as it has straight lines and it's closed. A quadrilateral, so in other words, if we're narrowing it down to make a polygon into a quadrilateral, it has to have those straight sides that form a closed figure, but it has to only have 4 of them. In order for it to be a trapezoid, it has to still have all those things: straight sides, closed figure, 4 sides, but it has to have at least one set of parallel sides. And then if we narrow it down even farther to that parallelogram, then it has to have straight sides, closed figure, it has to have 4 sides, and it has to have 2 sets of parallel sides in order for it to become a parallelogram.